In this lesson, we'll learn about ambient occlusion and curvature shaders. Open up this shader network that is assigned to the geometries and add an ambient occlusion shader. Ambient occlusion allows you to approximately fake or simulate global illumination or indirect diffuse lighting. Back in the time when using global illumination was very expensive and would take forever to render, artists would use ambient occlusion to simulate global illumination without having to use the full solution, and that would not result in a realistic lighting, but it was better than nothing. Nowadays, the main use of ambient occlusion is to add dirt, details, discoloration, for example, to the corners and nooks and crannies of your shaders. You see where the surface of the geometry are close enough to occlude each other, we get a dark shade, and where they don't, we get a bright shade. And that's what these black and white colors are responsible for. White color controls the color of the unoccluded areas. Let's change it to blue. And black color controls the color of the occluded areas. Let's change it to red for now. So the occluded parts are red and the unoccluded parts are blue. Samples controls the number of samples we want to calculate ambient occlusion with. The higher the number, the less noisy the effect would be. So at 0, we get no ambient occlusion because there is no way to calculate it. At 1, we get a very grainy effect, and at something like 5, we have much cleaner result. For now, set it back to 3. Spread controls how focused or diffused ambient occlusion should be. So as I decrease it, I'm basically compressing the effect and increasing the contrast between occluded and unoccluded areas. At 0, we only have two distinguished colors, the white and the black colors, and there would be no gradation between occluded and unoccluded areas. For now, set it back to 1. Near clip controls the minimum occlusion distance that is sampled. So as I increase near clip to something like 5, 10, 20, let's say 40 centimeters, you start to see less details in the corners and crevices, and only the broader parts are considered occluded. For now, set it to 0. Far clip controls the maximum occlusion distance that is sampled. So as I start to decrease it to something like 100 centimeters, 50, 25, and finally 10 centimeters, we start to lose ambient occlusion in the broader areas, so you can decrease this value in case you are interested in the very fine details. For now, set it to 25 centimeters. Fall off controls how the effect gradiates between occluded and unoccluded areas, and as I start to increase it to something like 1, 5, 10, 20, or 50, you can see how the effect is being limited to just the very corners. For now, set it to 0 and set the far clip to around 10 centimeters. The next important parameter is invert normals, which solid angles defines this option like this. This attribute changes the direction of the rays being traced. When it is off, the rays are traced outside of the surface. When it is on, the rays are traced inside the surface. I can loosely say that it inverts the ambient occlusion effect. Self only, if enabled, the shader only gathers occlusion against the same object, so basically it won't consider other objects when calculating the ambient occlusion effect. This trace set allows you to exclude a certain mesh or surface from being calculated by the shader. It needs some basic setup here, so let's say we don't want the main body of the car to be considered in the ambient occlusion calculations. Let me close the shader network and find that body geometry. Add an Arnold parameters tag, and then add one trace sets and name it something like body. It can be anything, just remember it because we need to use it later on. Now we have created a trace set for the body of the car. Open up the shader again, and in this trace set field, type in body. And now the main body of the car is excluded from the calculations. Trace set is a broader concept where you can like exclude objects from each other's reflections or refraction. We will be talking about that when we discuss the Arnold parameter tag in one of the later lessons of the course. You can use the ambient occlusion in your workflow like any other texture. Let's add a standard surface shader and set it as the beauty shader and use this ambient occlusion as the base color, for example. There you have it. Or we can disconnect it for now. In the ambient occlusion, change the white color to white and black color to black and enable invert normals. Now back to the standard surface shader. We can increase the metalness to 1 and use the ambient occlusion map as the, I don't know, roughness, for example, or maybe metalness input of the shader. Now, let's talk about curvature shader. Add one to the work area and set it as the beauty shader. Also hide the car and unhide this decorative cup. Curvature is a map that outputs black and white based on the concave and or convex areas of the geometry. To see the effect a bit better, let me decrease the radius to 1 centimeters for now. So by default, the output is set to convex. That's why we see the convex areas of the object are mapped white and the rest of the model has darker grayscale values. We can change the output to concave, and now the opposite is happening. The concave areas are white and the convex areas are black. Another output mode is both. In that mode, the output of the convex areas will be in the red channel and concave areas in the green channel. And if you connect this curvature shader to an input that accepts 0 to 1 or black to white values like metalness or roughness, the map would be considered a black and white map where the green and red values are white and the black values are black or 0. For now, let's set it to convex. Samples controls the overall quality of the curvature sampling, and higher values will result in less noise, obviously. Radius controls the overall radius of the effect, and smaller values will result in finer details and higher values would make the effect smoother. Let's try 0.5 centimeters. Now we get more details, and if I increase it to something like 2, 5, 10, 20, and 40 centimeters, we get less details. Let's set the radius to 2 centimeters for now. Decreasing the spread value will result in a more restricted effect. Lower values of spread will shoot rays more vertically with respect to the surface, and the default value of 1 means that rays are shot in all directions. This basically acts as a threshold to remove unwanted small variations of the curvature. For now, set it back to 1. Another important option here is bias. Bias will affect the fall-off of the curvature. Higher values here will cover more and exaggerate the curvature, while smaller values will emphasize small details. Let's set the radius to 1 centimeters and bias to 0.3. Multiply multiplies the overall curvature effect by the factor you specify here. For example, if I set the multiplier to 2, we get a stronger effect, and if I set it to 0.5, we get a much weaker effect compared to before. And you can connect a grunge map to the radius and or multiply inputs to break up the map. For example, we can load this BW8 image, add a triplanar after it and set the triplanar as the beauty shader. In the triplanar, change the coordinate space to world and scale to 2 and set it as the multiply input. Now the effect is broken up. Now, the way you use this shader practically in your networks is very obvious. You have a black and white output from your curvature map, and you can use this map in your network however you want. For example, if you connect the output of the curvature shader to the specular roughness of your standard shader, the white parts are going to be more rough and the darker parts are going to be more sharp. Or you can use it as a mask to combine shaders in your layer shader node. Let's do that actually. Let's add a standard surface shader and use the nickel preset. Duplicate the shader and this time use the gold preset. Add a layer shader and set it as the beauty shader. Set the nickel as the first input and the gold as the second input. And use the curvature as the layer 2 mix input. And now we are using the curvature as a mask for the second layer, which was the gold shader, and it only shows up where the curvature map is white. So in this lesson, we learned about curvature and ambient occlusion shaders. See you in the next video.